Hi everyone, welcome. In this video, I'm going to take you through the step-by-step procedure to create and validate this form. This form looks quite beautiful. When I focus on any of the input fields, you see the placeholder shifts away and it works for all of them. But the purpose of this video is how we validate the form. So how do we go about it? Check it out. Let's assume this is the only name my parents were able to give me, but don't tell them. So over here, I enter this email. In the repeated email, I entered something different and it tells me emails do not match. But let's just ignore it. Click OK, enter my password, and when I try to submit, it tells me that both emails must match. So you can never submit this form unless the email and the repeated ones do match. So let's fix that problem. So I'll enter this email and the repeated one the same email, and now we are able to submit. So what if the emails do match but the other input fields are empty? Let's try and see. Now it's telling us to fill in this field. So even though the emails do match, there is no way we could submit this form because the other fields are empty. Even if you hover over them, you see that it says please fill in this field. So all the input fields are required, they are mandatory. So there is no way you could submit this form without filling in any of them or leaving some blank. So this is a very nice validation project to get you started. And we are building this using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript under 20 minutes. So grab your tools because we're starting right now. Yeah, folks, before we start this video, please take a moment to smash the like button for this video and subscribe to my channel for more tutorials like this one. I'll appreciate that. Thank you. In my code editor, I have one index.html, style.css, and script.js file. I also have an images folder with an image that I'll be using as the background. And on the right here, I have the HTML boilerplate which I've linked to the CSS and also to the JS file. Over here in the CSS, I also have these basic stylings here to get things started. So we'll head over to the HTML, and in the body tag, I'll create a div and give it a class container. Now let's style this container div in the CSS. So here I'll select the container and give it a width 100%, height 100 VH, display flex, align items, center, justify content, center, background image, linear gradient. I'll give it this RGB color code with a comma, paste it again, and after that we'll link an image. So with a comma URL. And I'll set background repeat to no repeat, background attachment to fix, background position to center, background size to cover. Now run this code with a VS Code Live Server extension. Now here we have this fresh web page with a background image and some color overlay on it. Now let's continue with the HTML. In this container div, we'll create another div and give it a class form container. In this form container div, we'll create a form and give it the ID form. The action is not required. In the form, we'll create a div, and in this div, we'll create an H1 header, and the text is sign up. And after this div, we'll create another div again and give it a class inner div. And in this inner div is where we'll have the input and the labels. So here, let's create a label for first name. And the label text is first name. And after the label, we'll create an input. The type should be text. The name, we can remove it. And the ID must match the 4 of the label. So first name. And we'll give it a placeholder, enter first name. Now let's copy this inner div and paste 4 more times and make some changes for the other elements. So the second one will be last name. So we change the first to last. And the text should be last name as well. The ID should be last name. And the placeholder as well, last name. And for this next one, we'll change it to email 1. And the label text will be email. The input type will be email. And for the ID is email 1. It has to match the 4 attribute of the label. Once the 4 attribute of the label matches the ID of the input, we can click on the label to highlight the input field. So we change the placeholder to enter email. And this next one is for email 2. The label text is as well email. The ID is also email 2. And the placeholder repeat email. And the next one is password. So for password, the text that the input type is password. The ID is password. And the placeholder enter password. We have to paste it for the last time, the inner div for date. So the first should be date of birth. And the label text should be date of birth. The ID as well should be date of birth. Like the way we spelled it for the 4 attributes. And we'll remove the placeholder for this. And we change this one to password, the label. So these are the form elements that we need. And this is how it looks so far. So let's start this in the CSS. Now let's select the form container. Give it a padding, background color, this RGB color code, border radius, 25% border. Now let's start the H1. Set the text align to center. Font style. Font width 900. Color. This RGB color code. This is looking a bit okay now. Now let's select all the div in the form container. And give it margin 10 pixels. Now let's start the labels in the inner div. Give it a font size 1.2 rem. Margin right 10 pixels. So now let's start the input. Width 200 pixels. Give it a height 35 pixels, a transparent background, cursor pointer, outline none, border 2 pixels solid, the font size 1.2 rem. We also remove the border at the top. So now let's start the placeholder. Double colon. Font size 1.2 rem. Now everything looks like this, but since there is a problem with the date of birth, so let's check the input type. Now the input type over here is text. Let's change it to date. Now everything is working very well. We want to change the position of the placeholder whenever we click in the input field. So let's select that. Column focus. And when we are focused in it, we'll take the placeholder. Column placeholder. We'll set the position absolute. Give it left 40 pixels. So now when we click in it, so this is exactly what we want. In the HTML, before the closing form tag, let's create a button. Let's create two buttons, one for reset and one for submit. Reset. Let's give it a type of reset. Let's break. And after the reset button, let's create a submit button with a class submit btn. The text is submit. And the type is submit. So now let's start the buttons. Now let's select the button. Give it a width 90%. Give it a height of 50 pixels, set the cursor to point out, give it some margin and increase the font size. We give it some background color, set the color to white, remove the border and also the outline. And we'll give it a border radius of 25 pixels. And we'll set the margin left to 15 pixels. And when we save this, now everything is looking very well. But now we don't have any validation on this form, so we want to add that. And the kind of validation we want on this form is to be sure that the email and the repeated one do match. So that if the email over here, the first email does not match the repeated one, we alert the user and prevent the user from submitting the form. And also we want to be sure that every input field is filled with the details that we're expecting before the user can submit. So this is the validations that we are going to implement in this tutorial. So let's head over to the JavaScript file. Now in the JavaScript, what we want to do is to get some HTML elements. We first want to get the submit button. We also want to get the first email and the repeated one. So let's get that in the JavaScript. So let's select the submit button. Now let's select the two emails by their class name. Email 1. So we can copy this and paste and change for email 2. We'll call it email 2. Now what we want to do next is to set event listener on email 2. So email 2.add event listener. And it's a change event. So that when a change is made to the input in the input field, we'll call a function. Let's use an arrow function. It takes no parameter. What we want to do in this function is to compare the value of email 1 to email 2 to see if they match. We want to be sure that what a user enters in the first input field for the email is the exact same thing that they're entering in the second input field for the email. And we'll use an if statement to compare. So if email1.value not equal email2.value, what do we want to happen? We want to alert the user that the emails do not match. Emails do not match. Okay, we'll add an else. See, it's not required. This else part does absolutely nothing, but we just add it. And over here is email 2, not email 12. So now let's save this and see if it works. So I'll enter some random email over here, a different one. And it says emails do not match. But now we can still submit. And we don't want that to happen. So let's prevent the user from being able to submit the form when the emails do not match. And for that, we'll have to set events on the form itself. So let's select the form. Call it the form. Report to document or get element by ID. So now let's add event listener. And the event is submit. And after that, we want to call a function. So we'll use an arrow function as well. And this takes in a parameter event. You can basically call it anything you want to. So over here too, we'll still check if email 1 matches email 2. So we can copy this one and paste over here the condition. If it does not match, we'll first stop the form from submitting. So that we use event.prevent default. The event over here dot prevent default. And it's a function, so be sure to call it after everything with a bracket. And after we stop the form from submitting, we want to alert the user that something is still wrong. So we must alert them that both emails must match. Now let's try our code and see if it works. So I'll put in some random email, this one, a different one. We say emails do not match, but we can accept and go on. And if we try to submit, it says both emails must match. So we can submit this form unless the emails do match. So let's try and put some correct emails. Let's pretend this is a correct email. We'll put the same thing here. And if we try to submit, it did submit. But you can see a problem. Even though the first name, the last name, other input fields are empty, we are able to submit. And we don't want to do that. We want every input field to have a value. We don't want to leave any of them blank and be able to submit. And for that, we just have to add required to all the input fields. So here in the HTML, after all the input fields, after the placeholder, we just put required. Required. Maybe date of birth will not be required. So now, let's enter something. And over here, let's enter the same thing. And let's submit. Even though the emails do match, you see that we are required to complete every side, every field. So we can submit without filling up every field in the input in the form. So this is a very solid validation. Yeah, so people, this is basically how we've come to the conclusion of this video, how we build this custom form validation using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. If you find any value in this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more tutorials like this one. As always, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.